My name is Malcolm Legrecki. I am going to read a true story from Dying Testimonies of Saved and Unsaved, titled Thomas Payne's Dying Words. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Thomas Payne was born in Thetford, England in 1737. He is widely known by his connection with the American and French revolutions and by his infidel writings. In 1791, he published his work entitled The Rights of Man. In 1793, while in a French prison, he wrote his famous work, The Age of Reason, against atheism and against Christianity, and in favor of deism. In 1802, he returned to the United States, where he died in 1809. We take the following from Farrar's Critical History of Free Thought. In Payne, who wrote in France in the midst of the French Convention, we meet a reproduction of the spirit of early English deism, animated by the political exasperation which had characterized the French. His doctrines come from English deism, his bitterness from Voltaire, his politics from Rousseau. To Payne are due the socialistic schemes of Owen, which in some respects seem to be derived by direct lineage from him. Also the expression of unbelief in the poetry of Byron and Shelley. During the session of the French Convention, Payne composed his infidel work, Age of Reason, by which his name has gained an unenviable notoriety. And after the alteration of political circumstances in France, he returned to America and there dragged out a miserable existence, indebted to his last illness for acts of charity to disciples of the very religion that he had opposed. Again, we quote from McIlvaine's Evidences. Payne's first wife is said to have died by ill usage. His second was rendered so miserable by neglect and unkindness that they separated by mutual agreement. His third companion, not his wife, was the victim of his seduction while he lived upon the hospitality of her husband, holding a place in the excise of England. Payne was dismissed for irregularity, restored and dismissed again for fraud without recovery. Unable to get employment where he was known, he came to this country, commenced as a politician, and pretended to some faith in Christianity. Congress gave him an office, from which, being soon found guilty of a breach of trust, he resigned in disgrace. The French Revolution allured him to France. Habits of intoxication made him a disagreeable inmate in the American minister's house, where out of compassion he had been received as a guest. During all this time his life was a compound of ingratitude and perfidy, of hypocrisy and avarice, of lewdness and adultery. In June 1809, the poor creature died in this country. The Roman Catholic Bishop Fenwick says, a short time before Payne died, I was sent for her by him. He was prompted to do this by a poor Catholic woman who went to see him in his sickness and who told him if anybody could do him any good, it was a Catholic priest. I was accompanied by F. Coleman, an intimate friend. We found him at a house in Greenwich, now Greenwich Street, New York, where he lodged. A decent-looking and elderly woman came to the door and inquired whether we were the Catholic priests, for she said, Mr. Payne has been so much annoyed of late by other denominations calling upon him that he has left express orders to admit no one but the clergymen of the Catholic Church. Upon informing her who we were, she opened the door and showed us into the parlor. Gentlemen, said the lady, I really wish you may succeed with Mr. Payne, for he is laboring under great distress of mind, ever since he was told by his physician that he cannot possibly live and must die shortly. He is truly to be pitied. His cries when left alone are heart-rending. "Oh Lord, help me," he will exclaim during his paroxysms of distress. "God help me! Jesus Christ, help me!" repeating these expressions in a tone of voice that would alarm the house. Sometimes he will say, "Oh God, what have I done to suffer so much?" Then shortly after, "But there is no God." And then again, "Yet if there should be, what would become of me hereafter? Thus he will continue for some time, when on a sudden he will scream as if in terror and agony, and called for by my name. On one occasion I inquired what he wanted. "Stay with me," he replied, "for God's sake, for I cannot bear to be left alone." I told him I could not always be in the room. "Then," said he, "send even a child to stay with me, for it is a hell to be alone. I never saw," she continued, "a more unhappy or more forsaken man. It seems he cannot reconcile himself to die." Such was the conversation of the woman who was a Protestant, and who seemed very desirous that we should afford him some relief in a state bordering on complete despair. Having remained some time in the parlor, we at length heard a noise in the adjoining room. We proposed to enter, which was assented to by the woman, who opened the door for us. A more wretched being in appearance I never beheld. He was lying in a bed sufficiently decent in itself, but at present besmeared with filth. His look was that of a man greatly tortured in mind, his eyes haggard, his countenance forbidding, and his whole appearance that of one whose better days had been but one continued scene of debauch. His only nourishment was milk punch, in which he indulged to the full extent of his weak state. He had partaken very recently of it, as the sides and corners of his mouth exhibited very unequivocal traces of it, as well as blood, which also followed in the track and left its mark on the pillow. Upon their making known the object of their visit, Payne interrupted the speaker by saying, "That's enough, sir, that's enough. I see what you would be about. I wish to hear no more from you, sir. My mind is made up on that subject. I look upon the whole of the Christian scheme to be an issue of lies, and Jesus Christ to be nothing more than a cunning knave and impostor. Away with you, and your God too. Leave the room instantly. All that you have uttered are lies, filthy lies, and if I had a little more time, I would prove it, as I did about your impostor, Jesus Christ." Among the last utterances that fell upon the ears of the attendants of this dying infidel, and which have been recorded in history, were the words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?"